Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. I'm going to quickly just share my screen so that we're ready to go. And I am going to mute everyone. Feel free that if you'd like to speak, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, but just to get rid of any background noise that we might accidentally have. Let's see. I can find that button. Okay. There we go. And I have just enabled transcripts so that anyone who would like to read my words instead of hear them is welcome to do that. Let's see. Okay, I think my screen is shared. Let's get to the right screen now. Okay, so today we're going to
So
continue.
pause. I actually don't
Yes.
see your screen.
You don't see my screen. Oh, I
No.
didn't click the second button, share. Okay,
There we
now,
go.
thank you, Sarah.
Anytime.
Okay, now you should be able to see my screen. So welcome to Block Theme Discussions. It's a social learning space, and each time we meet, we basically talk about some block theme related topic. And in the case of this week, we're going to take a look at and discuss Json schema, which you may or may not be familiar with. It's pretty cool. I think it's quite useful. And I would like to share that with you more. So as we get started, let's start with a little bit of housekeeping. I'm just going to rearrange a few things here. Okay. This meeting is being recorded. I will be sharing the recording via my YouTube channel. And there's a link to the playlist where I put them in the description of the meetup event. If you are at all concerned about your video being in the recording, you feel free to turn off video sharing. If you get any video at all in it, it's usually just a little thumbnail. So, and then the same for audio. If you prefer to just use the text chat, you're welcome to do though. Although I enjoy hearing voices when questions come up and discussion comes up. So please feel free to add your thoughts, ask questions, answer questions. If you know an answer or you know something that I don't, I would love to learn along with everyone else, because I am certainly not the absolute expert on any of the topics that we discuss. I just things that I think are interesting and helpful, and hopefully we can figure some stuff out together. So let's start by talking about what JSON schema is. I did not include a slide for this, but basically what JSON schema is it's a file that has been created by some contributors to the WordPress project, specifically the Gutenberg project, to assist with the creation of JSON formatted files. They are used in a couple of places in WordPress. One is for theme development, that's theme.json. And then there's another one that is also available for block development, that is block.json. So if you're registering a new block, creating a new block, you would include a block.json with that, with your plugin to define some settings. And that is really ultimately what JSON is it's a configuration file. So basically you're saying, I have this thing and I want to give it a definition. So you have an object and a value. So an object, and then you give it a value to set some kind of a configuration. And that's what we see when we are working with the theme JSON file or theme.json. I end up going back and forth on how I refer to it. So I'm not really sure if there's one right way. So if you are working with theme JSON, it can be kind of tricky to know what's available to you and what each thing does and whether or not new things have been added. And that is where JSON schema can help you. This is something that is typically going to be available to you in most modern IDEs or integrated development environments, such as VS Code or WebStorm, PHP Storm, any of those. I think that there are some other text editor type tools that also work with this. The one that I'm using today is VS Code. I honestly have not tested this with any other editors. So if someone has a different editor and wants to give it a go, maybe we can arrange for that. So, all right, so let's talk about what the schema helps us with. First is validation. Basically, it's going to help check your syntax to make sure that it's going to work. It's not 100%, but if you have an extra comma somewhere or a missing bracket, or you have a value that is not actually available in the schema, or not a value, but a object name that is not available in the schema or is being used in the wrong place, the validation can help you find that. So we can look at that when we get over to a bit of a demo. The next one is contextual suggestions. This is the best for me, because if I'm working in my file, I have my top level items in, or even I don't, I can start typing something and it's going to give me some ideas of what I might want to use. And then it's going to help me to autocomplete them. So I think that those three things in combination together are really helpful. And then the last one, and there are more things that Schema can do, but these are the ones that I think are most valuable for the way that we're using it in theme development. The last one is inline documentation. So if you hover over an object name, it's going to give you whatever description was provided in the schema file. And again, this file is being developed and maintained by the WordPress contributors. So let's go back and look at a theme JSON file. Can anyone tell me if you can see my text, if you can read it, or if I need to zoom it in a little bit more?
Yeah, it's just
a little small. Okay, let me get that zoomed in. When I first opened it, I had it set from the way I had it last week, and it was really, really big. So let's see if we can get it just right now. How's that? Okay, great. Okay, so here we are. This is if anyone was here last week, we looked at a theme called Archeo. And that is not where I am right now, but I would like to look at that file specifically because the developers of this theme included the schema line already in it. So it's a good starting point for this. So if you download or have access to your 2022 theme or many other block themes that are in the repository, you may or may not see this line in your file. Basically what this does is tells your editor, and this is at least for VS Code, it tells your editor that there is a schema available for this. I would like you to use it and make it available to do all of those features that we just talked about. So I'm gonna just make sure I haven't skipped any questions. I like what Sarah said here. So schema is the Microsoft paperclip, but actually helpful. I actually was very close to putting the little paperclip graphic in my slideshow because I think that's accurate. It's a little bit like that. Okay, so we've got this line. So first of all, when you're working with your JSON file, you're going to open the file with these curly brackets and then close the curly brackets. So anytime you open brackets, you also need to close them. Same thing with quotation marks. And then you'll see that we have this line here. And now, if let's say I remove my version from this, okay, I forgot to add my version. If I have my comma in there to separate to a new line, and I start with a quotation, it's going to tell me which options have not been defined yet in this file from the ones that are in the schema. So here I can see in this little this pop-up that I have patterns and version that are not defined in this file. So I can go ahead and add my version and it's going to autocomplete it to what's been defined in the file as well, which in this case is the current and latest version of theme JSON. So this lets WordPress know some things about how you're going to format things later in the file as this block theme system and theme JSON configuration changes and improves over time. These versions will increase and there will be minor changes in the way that that you write it. But by putting the version in, if you have an older version, it's going to use those older settings versus the newer settings. And even between version 1 and 2, there were some changes. So now if I go down in, so a really good option to look at is settings. So I'm in further into another level. If I go in here and I add another starting quotation mark, it's going to pop up and show me what options there are. And then in VS Code, I've got this little read more arrow to the side, and then it'll give me whatever text has been added to this blocks. So it's the setting for blocks, and then it tells me something about it. In this case, it says settings defined on a per block basis. Probably, I would say this could use a little bit of expansion to be a little more specific about what it can do. If I move down to border, then it says settings related to borders. But if within that border, so I added the border option, it filled in all of the brackets for me because it's using some auto completion just for the JSON format. That's the file extension. I can start that again and see what options are available for me within border. So I have color, radius, style, and width. And again, we get those, we get that read more option as we go down the list. So we've got allows users to set a custom border radius, border styles, and width. So the text that's available to us right now is pretty minimal. So it's enough to maybe give you a clue, but it definitely is something that maybe could use some additional contributions. So that is the basics of how that works. And now going back to the validation. So I've got a mistake in here. I have this opening and closing bracket with the quotation marks with nothing in it. And it's telling me that it doesn't like that. So I've got a little red squiggly line underneath this bracket here. And if I hover over that, it's going to try to tell me what maybe I did wrong. So in here it says colon expected, and it's because of a JSON problem. So if I add a colon in here and see if I can get that to go away. Yep, this is the JSON problem. So I could also just add some random thing here.
JSON problem is your problem.
Oh, I understand what you're saying. So yes, it is a mistake that I made, but the problem is related to the JSON formatting and not the theme JSON schema. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the border. And then down here, I put in some gibberish and it tells me if there's a problem. And it says that property is not allowed. So this is saying that I have a mistake in my theme JSON and I would need to change it to something that actually exists, like radius. And now it's telling me that I have a mistake in my value because I put a string in there and it's expecting a Boolean. So the radius should actually be something like true.
Something like.
Hey, Daisy, we've got a little bit of background noise. Would you mind muting everybody one more time, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay.
Beautiful.
And when I added the comma here, because if I were going to add another line to this, I'd want to add a comma before adding it. If I have a trailing comma with nothing left, nothing that goes to the next except that closing bracket, it's actually a mistake in the JSON formatting. So I would not want that there. So I can do that. And now this is all looking much better. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to the chat and try to catch up on some questions. Okay. So Lisa suggested a new topic, which is it possible to add theme JSON to any non-FSC full site editing theme or block theme? And the simple answer is yes. You can put this file into any block editor supported theme, and it will take you a long way towards being able to make full use of the block editor's customization options. So I do think that that would be a really good one to talk about at some point in the future, once when I add some new topics, probably starting in May.
Daisy, somebody
Yes.
asked, this is Elisa, somebody asked me what VS is and why and how you use the app. So could we maybe point them to something just so they know? I mean, obviously, because of the code hinting, it's awesome, but that would be nice.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Okay, let me get over to my browser. So VS Code is a product, and this is only one option of many, but Visual Studio Code is a Microsoft product that is cross-platform compatible. And I just went into the web version of it instead of finding where you can download it. Okay, here we go. So it's code.visualstudio.com. I'm going to put that link into the chat for everyone. And it's an app you install on your computer. So it's available for Mac, it's available for Windows, obviously, since it's Microsoft, and then it's available for Linux as well. And I've used it on, I think, all 3 of those operating systems, and it works really well. There are lots of plugins you can use to customize your experience. I might have a couple of plugins installed on mine, but it's pretty basic. It's not like I had to do anything really crazy to get that schema working on what I just showed you. But it is a very helpful thing to use something that's a little bit more aware of the work that you're doing to help you out as you're coding. Might be like a little bit of a secret that coders have these tools, that they don't just have all of that information just stored in their brain necessarily. Some do, not me. So I really appreciate the suggestions that you get and the validation to help you find your mistakes. So, all right. So I'm headed back over to the chat here. So how often is the schema updated? So the schema is actually managed as part of the Gutenberg GitHub repo. Let's see if we can go find it. Oh, let's try going to the right place. Okay, here we are. So I believe, see if I can figure out where it is. I can never quite remember. Tools, yeah. It's a file that's actually managed from here, and let's see if we can find the pull requests that are related to it. It's a better way to go. No labels with schema. Okay. I thought there was a label for it, perhaps there isn't. Basically, I know that at least one person on my own team at work is contributing to this, and then there are a few others as well. So there are a handful of people that are pretty invested in making sure this stays updated, and it's only been available since WordPress 5.9, so there's not a huge amount of history, but there is enough benefits for this and interest in the community that I expect it will continue to be maintained. So let's see. And then there's a link here about adding theme JSON to any theme, which is great. That's in the docs. And then there was a question about where this file was located, the theme JSON file. And so I'm going to switch, my computer will work. I will switch back over to switch back over to here and show you in the sidebar here. I'm in this Archeo theme directory. And then inside of that is theme JSON. So it's always going to be in your theme. It could be in a parent theme, and then you have a child theme with no theme JSON, and it'll just use the one from the parent theme, or it could be in your child theme if you're using one, and then it will potentially use pieces of both the parent and the child, depending on what's there, with the child theme being the one that takes precedent. So is the child theme file a full copy or just what you want to change? That's a great question. So if you're using a child theme, you can, there is some code in the system that will kind of merge the parent themes theme JSON in with the child themes theme JSON. I would say that that's kind of a little on the experimental side. It works. It will not break on you, I don't think, but figuring out exactly what's coming from where can be challenging as you're getting started. So if you're just getting used to theme JSON, I might recommend that you just copy the whole file and then work from there. So I think that would be the safest option for most people. Now, if there is a feature coming, which is another topic that we may add for discussion sometime, which are style variations, which you might have within your theme. You might have a subset of a smaller JSON file that takes over portions of your main JSON file. So like for color schemes or design differences. So you would be able to have variations on your theme all from a JSON file, which is pretty cool. Is theme JSON case sensitive? Yes. It will be case sensitive. It is basically the whole idea of a JSON file is to be human readable and computer parsable. So what that means is that the computer needs to be able to understand it, and in order for that to happen, it really does need to be case sensitive, or else you would have to add in an enormous number of checks in order to like try to match things up. But if you put it in the way that it should be, you'll see some capitalization things in here. Like anytime you have a parameter or object here that has two words, they're pushed together. It starts with a lowercase, and then there's a camel case letter for when the second word starts. So it's, if you're not, that is kind of a carryover from the way JavaScript is coded for naming conventions. So you'll see that a lot in JavaScript, and that's where that comes from. So we have a lowercase at the beginning, uppercase in the middle, or however many words there are, will start with an uppercase from there on. If it's only a single word, then it's always going to be lowercase. The values are going to be potentially a little different. So they're going to be more related to how it's going to be used by WordPress. So this post type section here, if you had a post type that had whatever you actually named your post type when you registered it is what would need to be here for the ID. So if you had something longer, it might have dashes in it, I don't know, but it should be the way that it was registered. So Deb says, okay, but then if the theme updates the JSON, you have to track your changes when there are updates. So if you're using a theme that you control the code on completely yourself, then you can just change your theme JSON on your own. If you're using a theme that's likely or possibly going to be updated externally, like a theme from the theme repository or from a plugin developer that you've purchased a theme from, I would suggest considering to use a child theme for any customizations that you make, including theme JSON, because you will lose those changes very likely if the theme updates.
Daisy?
Yes.
I think that the question had more to do with the fact that we both suggested that you copy over the theme JSON into the child theme.
Yes.
So if you do that, then if the parent theme JSON changes, David, I think she's referring to, do we need to copy over and then update our child theme changes?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question, and a little bit more nuanced from what I was picking up on. So there are different things you could do. Probably what I would do is if I knew that there was a change to the parent theme and I had the child theme version, I would run a difference check on it and see what exactly changed and try to like see if there was anything that I needed to move over. If it's a major change, then you might need to do that. If it's a minor change, you may not. All right, let's see. So Lisa says, I see in your example blank and blank for name and title. That's a good observation. So in this theme, Archeo, a couple of custom templates have been defined. Just one that's called blank. The name is kind of like the slug if you're working with a post. That's going to be lowercase, no spaces. It's basically the ID that the system is using to determine what this is. The title is what you're going to read on the screen. So that can have spaces, it can have uppercase letters. So so the name is intended for the computer and the title is intended for the human. Rita linked a JSON schema, get started step by step. Yep, that's a great resource. The JSONschema.org is, I believe, the official place to go for the way that this configuration language is created. Let's see. Do you have a process recommendation for using Diff tools to merge in theme updates versus overriding? I don't do enough of this myself to really have a good system. I think that because I do it so infrequently, it would be a pretty manual process for me. So like, there are tools in IDEs, like I can open two files next to each other. And then I think that I could, there should be some kind of a diff tool right within VS Code. If there's not, then I'm 100% sure that there would be plugins available. And whatever tool you're using would give you those options. Now, there are also specific diff tools. There are apps and websites and whatnot where you can load two files and just diff them. And that is basically its only purpose. And then there's a way to merge or to copy back and forth. Usually what you'll get is like an arrow in the middle and you can send it one direction or the other. Yeah. So there's definitely solutions for that. I don't have any specific recommendations right now, just because I haven't needed to do it in recent even years. It just isn't a part of my day-to-day right now. Let's see. Excuse me. All right. Can this be used with custom Gutenberg blocks from Belinda? So yes, kind of. So when you are working with these items, usually, like for example, the color, and you're just, let's say you're defining palette options. Let me get rid of that. That will work anytime you have a block that is using the default WordPress color palette in as one of its settings. So in that way, yes, it will work for that. You also have the option of defining custom blocks. So here we have, let's see. Actually, it's blocks, and this theme doesn't actually define any block specific styles, but if I wanted to, I could say I wanted to add blocks. And then I wanted to, within that, I want to add color. Oops. And then within that, I wanted to add a palette. So I could actually, this isn't quite right because I need to say which block it would be. Maybe I could put the button block would have a different set of colors. Sorry, this is a little bit messy.
You're missing the column after core button.
Oh, thank you. And I'm also missing my everything after palette, which would just be more of this. So I could, let's say if in my button, I wanted my foreground color, still named foreground, but only for the buttons to be, let's just use the named purple, whatever that color actually is. So this would say that instead of using the main palette foreground, it would use this alternate one that's only being made available for the button. So, but you would just need to know the name of your block here. So in this case, it's core button. If it were a custom block, it would look a little bit like this. There would be some word here that was determined by the developer of that block, and then the name of the block. Oops. Let's click on the link. Okay, let's see what else we have for questions here. Is there an easier way of working with theme JSON? It is one very long file. I was experimenting with writing in JavaScript and converting to JSON, but not sure if there's a better way. There are some tools starting to pop up around the community. So we've got, some of these are not being actively developed. But if you search for a theme JSON builder, so Carolina Newmark has created something that's pretty cool. This one will create a block theme, but I'm pretty sure, I thought she had a theme JSON specific thing as well. But this will actually create a whole theme for you that's ready to be customized. And here is something that looks like it might be coming along that would give you a UI to help you build your theme JSON file. The problem with these right now is that theme JSON is changing so quickly. It's probably going to be a little difficult for these projects to keep up for right now. If you consider that the Gutenberg plugin updates every 2 weeks, and then whatever changes happen during a certain period will hopefully get rolled to core as WordPress is updated 2, 3, 4 times a year.
Daisy,
Yes.
related to that, how do we know, for example, when a feature is in core in the core theme JSON versus when it's in Gutenberg, and whether it's just one theme JSON that we have to worry about, or are we looking at updates? What happens? Okay, I'll stop there. There are more questions.
Yeah, so I wish I had a really straightforward answer for that. I would keep tabs. One way is to check the block editor handbook, and there's a reference for theme JSON. So, and the idea here is that we have this version 2 living reference, and if we move to a version 3, I imagine that will be added. And this is going to, theoretically should list all of the properties and values that are available, and what kind of value it's looking for, and what the default is, and whether or not there are any properties that can be added. So, or specific properties.
Daisy, could you drop
Yes.
that link in the chat?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, so here is that link.
But the biggest issue for me, at least, is that the living reference doesn't tell you if it's in Gutenberg or core, and then what version of Gutenberg, because if I'm working on a project, am I supposed to have Gutenberg installed, or is that optional for during development?
Sure. Yeah, I would. So, all right, I'm going to address one question that I sort of heard in there, that probably wasn't your main question, and then we'll go back. In terms of whether or not you should have Gutenberg installed during development, honestly, I would say use what's on the platform where the code is going to be going. You want to match that, because you don't want to build a lot of stuff on new and experimental features that isn't going to be available on the site. So if that site does have the Gutenberg plugin, which is fine, there are lots of sites that just run the Gutenberg plugin all the time to have access to all of the earliest stuff. You can do that, but if you are developing, I would keep your development environment as close as possible to the live environment. That's just a general rule of thumb, I think. For experimentation, though, definitely try out the Gutenberg plugin. And now that I said all that, I think I may have lost the other half of your question. Oh, it was about how you know what version things are. Yeah, that would be a really great addition to these tables, in addition to some formatting maybe, would be to have a since column to say, okay, this property has been available since Gutenberg version X and WordPress version X.X or something like that. I don't see anything like that here right now. There is another document. I think it's under how-to guides. Might not be, or I'll search for it. It's the global styles document. It's called Global Styles, Settings and Styles. And this is the older document. It might not be as updated. Like, for example, it says WordPress 5.8 comes with. It could use some updating, but in here, what you have are a few places where it'll say, let me go down to here. You have the WordPress version of something and then the Gutenberg version. And the idea, I think, was to always have this be the most recent version of WordPress and the most recent version of Gutenberg, but I don't know for certain that this has been fully updated on a regular basis. It'd be great if it could be automated somehow, but I'm not sure. I think that the other reference is more likely to become an automated item, but this one is manually updated.
And one final question, and then I'll give it back to the group, is what happens when you have a feature in your theme JSON that your current implementation of WordPress doesn't support?
It should just ignore it. So let's see if an example of that could be like comparing between 5.8 and whatever version of Gutenberg this is relating to, because these both still say version 1. So this is definitely older. I think that Gutenberg had things like for font typography, a lot more typography. I think if you had one of these in your file and you installed it on WordPress and it didn't support it yet, but it does support theme JSON, it's just going to ignore it. And typically your version is going to determine what WordPress does with it. So if you have, if you're using an older version of WordPress, let's say you're using WordPress 5.8, which was the first version that supported theme JSON at all, and should have a V1, and you install something with V2, I'm not entirely sure. I think that it would just revert it back to version 1 and look for only things that were available at that point. So, but that would be an interesting thing to try.
But if I hear you right, you're saying in like development for a client, you would not actually add Gutenberg because it's gonna be too wild, like wild card. And you're saying that you should only put the things into the theme JSON file and not actually include the Gutenberg plugin and only use that for playing. I need a little more clarity on that. Sorry.
Sure. So this is my opinion only. So it is not necessarily a best practice. But I would say that if your client site has Gutenberg installed on it, then your development site should also. So you want to try to align those. I would be very concerned myself, unless I was really sure that I was using the plugin in a way that maybe was just preparing me for the next version. I would have to be pretty aware of what the changes were coming to the next version of WordPress. So I would say maybe during the beta period of WordPress, you might try installing that on your development environment to prepare for what's coming in the next version of WordPress. But there are things that are in the Gutenberg plugin that are fully functional. They work, but they're still being iterated on, and they may or may not make it into the very next version of WordPress. It might be 2 versions away. Does that answer your question? And this is really only my opinion. So beyond that, if you do develop with the Gutenberg plugin, which you certainly can do, and you're moving it over to a site without the Gutenberg plugin, you probably just want to do some testing to make sure everything works the way you intended.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to keep going through the questions here. Do you think it will be likely for non-developer site owners are going to keep up with the changes to theme JSON? Will the site break if the theme JSON is not consistently monitored for updates? It should not break. The purpose of the version line at the top of the file or wherever you end up putting it is to let WordPress know that this file was created at this point in history and it still needs to continue working forever. So that is the benefit. That's the backward compatibility aspect of theme JSON. So you can have something that maybe like an example is some of these properties that have the word custom in them have been changed to just be the word. So instead of custom duotone, it might just be duotone. So those are the kinds of changes that we've been seeing in theme JSON between version 1 and version 2. Along with supporting new options like some of these typography things. So they were added in version 2 and they're available in core now, but they weren't for 5.8. But I don't think that clients need to be concerned about even the existence of that file, to be honest. It's basically just a set of presets. So the things that go in, some of the things that go into your theme JSON file are your presets, what your blocks populate with when you first start working with them in the editor. Your supports, which is basically turning certain things on certain blocks off and on based on your client's needs or trainability. And then you have your styles, which is basically applying some of the, so you have your presets that they're adding like drop-down menus. I'm sorry, I've misspoken a little bit. I got a little tangled up in my head. The presets are adding drop-downs like fonts or text sizes or colors, those kinds of things that are giving you a set of options to choose from. And then the styles section is what your defaults are going to be for those settings when you first add your block in. So they're basically shortcuts for your clients to not have to do all of the configuration themselves every time they add a block. If there's a common way that they add a block in and that you want those things to be there first, that's part of the purpose of theme JSON, is to do those settings. And then there are some other things like defining what templates should be available for which post types, and what template parts should be available for which areas on your site, like header or footer. So those are some of the things that go into theme JSON. It's really allowing your theme to be somewhat opinionated about what the experience is going to be for your clients. Let's see. Lisa says, I try to build sites for my client that will be resilient. I want to use new tools like theme JSON, but trying to avoid creating fragility. For some of my clients, they do not ask for my intervention after building and launching. Yeah, that is a common thing. It's a big ask for especially a small business to do a big redesign, and they want to just take it and let it go. A lot of times, at least in my experience. And I would say that trying to keep things future-proof is a really good idea. And in some ways, it's easier to do that than it has been in the past. And I think that one thing that's coming along pretty well is the ability to create blocks and patterns that can be locked or partially locked. So maybe you can add the group of blocks in and only change the content of them, but not remove them, move them around, accidentally delete one, those kinds of things. So I think that we'll see more and more of that. And there's always a lot of focus on trying to make it so that it can be fully open for those that are just doing their own thing and want all of the options available, but also can be locked down and modified for those that are looking for a very bespoke, specific to them custom experience. So trying to have both of those things balanced out takes some time and some planning and maybe some false starts occasionally. So you'll see some things added and removed in the plugin. And that's the point of having a lot of this developed outside of core, is that there's a little bit more ability to work slowly and iteratively. And then when it's ready, then roll it into core. Okay. Tom says, yesterday I had a page be corrupted on save, resulting in a backend white screen of death. Love those. Despite editor code rendering in source. The block plugin had to be disabled so I could roll back a pre-corruption version. So it was a custom block that allowed that. Yeah, I mean, ideally you wouldn't be able to break the block code in a way that would cause the white screen, but it sounds like you might have been using a specific block plugin with a block that may have some saving issues. I don't know for sure. So I mostly work with core blocks at this point, but your mileage may vary. If the version of theme JSON hasn't changed, then it shouldn't change, Carlos says. Yes, I agree with that. So it should continue to use whatever was available at the time that that version was made available, and moving forward to a new version could require some reworking of your file. So if you want to start adding new features, then you might need to make some adjustments to your version so that it will still be correct. Deb says, when you change or define a template block or on a particular page, is it changing the JSON or is it using CSS? Where is it storing that? So, okay. I think I understand this question, and I'm going to try to answer it based on what I'm understanding. So if you, if you're adding a block to a page or a post, and then you set up the settings, the settings and everything about that are probably going to be stored in the HTML markup for that post. If you're using the defaults, then it won't have that extra markup that would set up all those style settings, because it's assuming that you want to use whatever the defaults for the site are. So it can be a combination of the JSON, which is probably a little too much for us to get into today, because it's getting into the style section of theme JSON, which can get a little heady. Basically, when you name a style and you give it some rules, then that name, if it's used and then the styles are changed later, then so will it change on your front end, because it's actually adding a CSS class to the markup that then is being pulled. The CSS for it is being pulled in by Gutenberg and used on that page. So most of the time you're not going to, you can add inline CSS by changing the settings, the style settings on a block. But if you're just pulling it in and using what the presets are, then it will just, it'll just have the class and just pull in from the theme JSON CSS. I hope that that wasn't too confusing. But the CSS is going to be loaded up in line with your page, whether you're in the admin area or on the front end, generated from that theme JSON file. But also pulling in any styles that you have in a CSS file that's being loaded. So it is possible to override what's in theme JSON with CSS files. All right. Yes, Deb, that is correct. The CSS is actually being generated, not by the JSON directly, but by using what's in the JSON to generate the CSS from it. All right, so could be some GPL challenges to locking. I'd love to hear what you mean by that, James. So the way that block locking works is basically it just puts a little bit of a safeguard around how you can work with the content in the editor. It's pretty easy to override, but it's a little bit of a barrier between your user and the front end, so that you can actually just make it a little harder to move things around if they're really intended to be used in a specific way. So it is possible. There are some options. You can set it to not allow the block to be moved or deleted. You can have it so that it can be moved but not deleted.
I think that James, it doesn't refer to locking access to the code for the block. It just means that in the editor, you're not allowed to do some things. So I don't think that there is any ground to challenge based on the license. And there is also an issue of, since Gutenberg uses React and React is also licensed under MIT, there might be a more lenient interpretation of what licenses you can use as well.
True. Yeah, that's a good point, that it's not really the code that's being locked. It's not being abstract. It's not being locked down at all. Actually, the code is still just as available as it always has been. It's just the ability to move things within the block editor is what gets locked. So thank you for helping to clarify that, Carlos. I appreciate all of your help today. It's great. So let's go ahead and wrap up for today. We have 3 minutes left. So based on our conversation about JSON, and particularly in terms of like the descriptions of some of these items, it would be really cool to encourage people to get involved in helping to maintain and improve the JSON schema. So there are a few ways that you can get involved. One is to test, try things, see what works, what doesn't work. If you find a problem, report it as a GitHub issue to the Gutenberg project on GitHub. If you're able or willing, contribute code or improvements to that JSON file. Submitting a merge request is, or a pull request rather, is a really good way to make suggestions. Like if you can actually make the suggestion along with the solution, it can get a little bit more attention. And write some documentation. Being able to improve the way that we explain how to use these things or what things are would be also very valuable. So I'd be happy to talk with anyone who is interested in getting started and contributing. But basically, this is a community project, and everything that we do is done as a group effort. So we always can use more people to do all kinds of different things, both code and non-code. So, and I hope that this has been an interesting conversation for everyone. I really enjoy having these talks. I would love it one day if we could have it in a real physical room where I could hear everybody's voices and see everyone's faces. But for now, this is cool, but maybe a some word camp someday we can cross paths. So we'll be continuing this series next week with whatever topic I put on the meetup event. I can't quite remember. I think it was something to do with in JSON. So yeah, I look forward to seeing you all next time. And please feel free to reach out to me. I'm Daisy O on the WordPress Make Slack. And I hope everyone has a really good weekend. Thanks.